Excuse me.
Hello, and welcome to this installment of the AME Church Department of Christian Education's CED Talks. And let me bid you a blessed Christian Education Month. On this last day of September, the last day of Christian Education Month, the department is happy to offer this latest installment in the CED Talk series. And we are excited to welcome to this platform Dr. Paulette Isaac-Savage. Um, and she is here today to share with us some of the initial findings of a national research project uh, which she has led over these last several months. Many of you were invited to complete a survey as a part of this research on instructional perspectives of Christian educators in the Black church. And so we are so excited to have her with us today to share, to let us know what she is finding from this research that might help us think about the now and the next in faith formation in our churches. She is well qualified to do this research, a lifelong learner, a professor of education. She serves as professor of adult education at the University of Missouri in St. Louis. She's a consulting editor for Adult Education Quarterly, Adult Learning, and Education and Urban Society. She's presented at the local, state, national, and even international levels. She is the president-elect for the American Association of Adult and Continuing Education. In 2019, she was inducted into the International Adult and Continuing Education Hall of Fame. She's written many scholarly articles for various journals on a wide variety of subjects: adult education and spirituality, Black men, Black men's health and their perspectives, the Black church and the promotion of health, and the list goes on and on. She is truly a Christian educator, a religious educator at heart, and we are so happy to have her with us today. So, Dr. Isaac-Savage, welcome to CED Talks. We are so glad to have you with us today. And maybe if you would begin, I've given a brief introduction to let people know who you are, but maybe you can share a bit about yourself by maybe sharing a bit about your vocational journey as a Christian educator.
Sure. First of all, thank you for the introduction. And I also want to take this time to thank Reverend Pierce for allowing the AME Church to participate in this study. It took us a moment to connect. We played phone tag for a while, but once we did, he was on board and things just really started moving. So I want to publicly thank Reverend Pierce for his assistance with this research. So as it relates to my background, I began looking at or conducting research on the Black church back in the late 90s, early 2000s. And I did that as I was working on my dissertation at the University of Georgia. And it really bothered me as I sat in my classes and they kept saying that, well, Black people don't participate in adult education. And at the time, I was attending a very large Baptist church in Atlanta, Georgia, and our doors were open 7 days a week and education was taking place 7 days a week. So I said, okay, I need to tell our story because there is education going on in the Black church. You all just are not looking in the right place. And so that really piqued my interest in conducting research on the Black church. And so my seminal work looked at African Americans' motivations for participating in church-based education. And with that, I came up with 7 factors that helped us to understand African Americans' motivations for participating in church-based education. And just because of my involvement with the church, I just continued to conduct research on the Black church. Again, I wanted to help tell our story that I felt was not being told in the adult education literature. And so with that, as Reverend Pierce has mentioned, I've conducted research on a lot of different topics. And this is a topic actually I've been wanting to do for quite some time. In fact, when I first learned about this instrument some years ago, I was interested in doing it, but my research just took me in some other directions. And so I said, well, now is really a good time to do this, to look at instructional perspectives of Christian educators in the Black church. I had looked at motivations, I had looked at barriers, I had looked at the health education role, and even pastors' perceptions about the adult education role of the Black church. And so I said, okay, now it's time to look at that of the Christian educators. And so that's what really sparked my interest with that. And so this is something that I will continue to do even after I retire. From the university, I want to continue to conduct research on the Black church, again, to help tell our story.
Excellent. Because, the vocation of the church educator, the Christian educator, is to tell the story, the great story, the divine story, and how that story is linked to our stories. And so very clearly you are a Christian educator at heart, and we thank you for this work, this body of work that you are doing. And clearly you are far too young to retire, but
thank you.
As you make plans for your distant retirement, maybe if you could just say a little bit about this instrument that you are using, and say a little bit more about instructional perspectives. And then we're just going to ask you to present your initial findings from the research that you.
Okay, sure. So in adult education, instructional perspectives is something that we talk a lot about. There's a lot of research on it. And when it comes to instructional perspectives, one of the things that we think is really important is for adult educators to be learner-centered, thinking about the experiences the learner brings to the learning situation and respecting those experiences. Sometimes adult educators tend to forget about that our learners are human just like we are. And so with that, it's important to keep those things in mind and also to empathize with our learners. Again, some of them come in with different issues. I know teaching on the collegiate level, some of my students come in with a lot of issues. And interestingly, since COVID, just seems like that has really escalated, if you will. And so it's so important that we empathize with our students as well. And then one of the things that we also talk about is teacher-centeredness. We have a lot of instructors that are very teacher-centered who as a result, really don't give learners an opportunity to learn. They don't take the time to get to know the learners. They just want to go in and teach and don't want learners to ask them any questions. And so as we think about instructional perspectives, it's important to understand those perspectives of those educators that are working with adults and to think about what are ways that we can enhance the learner's experience. And so if we look at those instructional perspectives and get a better understanding of that, then hopefully that can help us to enhance that learner's experience and encourage the learner to want to participate. I know in some research that I've done in the past looking at barriers to participation, the instructor serves as a barrier, unfortunately. And so with that particular research, I found that sometimes the instructor's perceptions or the way that person teaches don't align with the pastor's, for example. And so that can confuse learners within the church. Another barrier that I found as it relates to instruction is the course offerings. With this particular group of participants, they indicated that it would be nice just to see some different courses that are offered as opposed to seeing the same courses offered over and over again. But again, the instructor also plays an important role and can serve as a barrier to participation. So again, that's why I wanted to look at this research now to get a better understanding of the instructional perspectives of Christian educators in the Black church. So with that said, I will begin with my presentation, and I will ask that we go to the first slide. So again, from the University of Missouri, St. Louis, and I want to thank Reverend Pierce for his assistance. All right, next slide, please. So what I want to do this evening, four main things I want to do. I want to share some of the general findings from all the participants in the study, and then I will focus on the AME Church in particular, talk about next steps, and then would like to open it up for questions and answers, and also any comments that you might like to that you may have for us, maybe to have a little dialogue during our time together this evening. Next slide, please. So I invited all of the 7 Black mainline denominations to participate in this study. So as you can see, the Christian Methodists, there were 172 people that participated, National Baptist over 1,200, then the AME Zion Church over 300, and then AME, we had 226 participants. Now, the other denominations where you don't see numbers, they were really low, and so I'm not showing those, but again, these other denominations did say that they would be willing to participate. So Church of God in Christ, the other National Baptist Convention, and then Progressive as well. Next slide, please. So one of the things I wanted to look at, there were several demographic questions that we posed to participants, and one was gender. And this one did not surprise me, where we had more women to participate in the study than men. And I'm sure as you think about your own church, it's probably the case where there are more women than there are men in the congregation. And so again, this particular finding did not surprise me that there were more women than men who participated in the study. Next slide. Another demographic question that was posed was age. And so what really stands out to me is the number of participants between the ages of 65 and 74. As you can see, there were over 800 participants in that age group, and then over 250 who are 75 and older. And this is really striking to me as well, because so many times there's this belief that older adults do not interact with technology. And this seems to debunk that myth that, yes, they actually do participate in or interact with technology, because, of course, to complete the survey, they had to go online to do that. But you can also see that there are a large number of people who are between the ages of 55 and 64. So what this says to me that, and this is similar to what we've been hearing a lot about the church, that there are a lot of older adults who participated in this study, and probably a lot of older adults that are in our churches as well. We don't see as many young people like between 25 to 34. As you can see, that's the lowest number that participated in the study. Next slide, please. Also looked at educational level of participants. And so you can see that in general, the participants were pretty well educated. Some had associate degree all the way to graduate. And then under other, that also includes individuals that may have a terminal degree, a PhD, EDD, etc. So again, this is a very, I would say, educated group that participated in this study. Next slide. Also wanted to look at where churches were located. And so as you can see, the South is pretty well represented, with Alabama being the largest number, down to Michigan. So Michigan, in a way, I see is somewhat of an outlier, if you will, because it's certainly a northern state. But again, good representation from North Carolina, Georgia, and Mississippi as well. Next slide, please. Thank you. Another question that wanted to look at was geographic location. And no surprise there to me that most of the participants attended churches that were in our urban or inner city areas. But I was also happy to see the number in the rural area. In fact, in this case, there were more in the rural area than there were in the suburban area. And a lot of times I think the rural areas are overlooked. And I know, too, they have challenges sometimes when it comes to internet service. I have a doctoral student now. Every time we have a meeting, he always gets cut off and has to come back in because he just always has problems. So I was really happy to see the number of participants in the rural area. Then I also wanted to look at how long people have been members of their churches. And so it's very interesting looking at this, because when we posed the question, got some very interesting answers. Some people answer, well, at my previous church, I was there for 10 years. At another church, I was there for 20. And then they finally answered the question that we were looking for: how long have you been a member at your current church? And so you can see the largest number of people have been at their church for 2 to 10 years. But then there are those people who have been there a lot longer, up to 50 years, and some even longer than that. So another question other questions rather, I should say, that we wanted to look at was training. We asked people, did you participate in any Christian education training, either within your denomination or within your church? The majority of people indicated that they did. Also, the majority of people indicated that they made some changes to the way that they taught as a result of COVID. And then many indicated that they went from face-to-face to online. So I specifically asked individuals, how did you change your teaching as a result of COVID? So a lot of people indicated that you went to Zoom. Some people just said virtual. So I interpreted that to mean that could also be Zoom. Maybe they use Teams or some other type of program for online learning. But then some people also indicated that they use conference call. I know one of my friends indicated that's what her church did, because some of the older members in the church, and they have a lot of older members in her particular church, just were not comfortable with Zoom. And so, yeah, they use conference calling, and that worked out really well for them. So now I want to focus more specifically on the AME church. And with some of the slides, you will see some comparisons with the CME church as well as the AME Zion church. So first, looking at age, here again, you can see that between these 4 age groups, that the majority of participants were between the ages of 55 and 64. And the numbers got a little screwed here with the presentation, but you can see as well with the CME church and the AME Zion church, how large those numbers are for the 45 to 54 and 55 to 64, and particularly with the AME Zion, because there were more participants. You see there are like 77 people who indicated they're between the ages of 55 and 64. And then as we look at the next slide, you will see that we still have large numbers of people between the ages of 65 and 74 when we break it down. So in general, this number was pretty high, but even when we look at it from these 3 different denominations, you can see those numbers were high. And then for individuals 75 and older, again, 28, 19, and 24. So looking at educational level, for the AME church, you can see that there were 122 people that indicated that they had a graduate degree. So again, a very well-educated group. And then when we look at the AME Zion Church and CME, we see some similarities there as well. Overall, very educated group. So looking at the states, you can see for the AME church that most of the participants attended a church in Florida, and then we go all the way down to Alabama. So again, the South is very well represented for sure. And then when we look at the AME Zion Church, I found it interesting in some respects that New York ranked pretty high there, 25, and then South Carolina and Virginia. And then with the CME Church, what stood out to me was Texas, that they had a large number of people from that state that participated in the study. So here again, we do see some similarities as it relates to the states, a lot of southern states where people's churches are located. And also, I forgot to mention with the states, it was interesting too to see that there were some people outside of the United States that participated. So for example, there was at least one person, I believe, from Canada, somebody from Trinidad, somebody from South Africa that also participated in the study. So nice to have that international representation as well. Here again, you can see the demographics for the length of membership. So those individuals who have been members between 2 to 10 years are the largest number. Same thing with the CME Church and the AME Church as well. And then when you look at these other lengths, you can see there's some similarities basically, 26 to 30 years, and same thing with the AME and Zion and CME Church. There's some similarities with the length of membership that people have. And then for the next slide, you will see some people indicated that they have been members all their life, and some even over 70. So again, those would be those individuals who indicated that they were 75 and older. So now when it comes to the AME Church, when I asked about training, 186 people indicated that they had participated in some type of training within the church. 38 said that they had not. When asked about changes, over 200 people indicated that they did. Then finally, when asked the question about did you go from face-to-face to online, 176 people said that they did, and 27 said that they did not. Now, here's just a small sample of some of the courses that people indicated that they taught, and these were taken from the survey verbatim. So not surprising, Bible study, Sunday school, new member class, and of course, a class like that may have differing titles, but basically it's for new members. Somebody mentioned the introduction to Christianity, and then also adult liberation and faith. And I know that that might be a little different title than what the person indicated, but still I thought it was interesting to include that as one of the courses. So another thing I wanted to look at is how often do people teach? And so within the AME Church, you can see that the majority of the people teach weekly. And if I remember correctly, this was generally the case for most of the population that they taught weekly. But then you see the next largest group is the monthly. And then we have biweekly as needed. So as needed, that could be, once a year, that could be twice a year. But I think what's good to see that there are those individuals who are willing to step in to provide education to our adult learners if they are needed. So next, I want to talk more about the instructional perspectives inventory, which I mentioned a little bit about at the beginning. And so again, this particular instrument was developed by John Henschke. And so there are 7 subscales with this instrument. And so the number that you see to the right of the subscale are that's the number of questions that were on the survey. So with teacher empathy, we were specifically looking at teacher empathy towards students. And so a sample question that was posed was, how often do you notice and acknowledge to the learners positive changes in them? Under trust, which is trust of the learners, a sample question there was, how often do you display trust in learners to know what their own goals, dreams, and realities are like. Then there's planning and delivery of instruction. A sample question there was, how often do you establish instructional objectives? Then accommodating, there were 7 questions for that. And this is accommodating learner uniqueness. A sample question was, how often do you individualize the pace of learning for each learner? Then in sensitivity, as you can see, there were 6 questions there. And this is teacher insensitivity towards learners. So a sample question for that was, how often do you seem to get bored with the many questions learners ask? Then with learner-centered, which is pertaining to the learning process, a sample question was, how often do you conduct group discussions? And then finally, with teacher-centered learning process, a sample question is, how often do you make your presentations clear enough to forestall any questions that learners may have? So again, we have those 7 subscales as relates to this particular instructional perspectives inventory. And this inventory has been used many times, mostly in formal settings like at colleges and universities. So again, I thought it would be important to use it within the church in an informal setting to see what type of response I would get, and to also see if these scales would also be valid as well. So next, what I'm going to share with you are the mean scores as relates to the different demographic questions and then the subscales. And so with these mean scores, I looked at those numbers of N that were 5 or higher. And so in some cases, there may be a particular group that shows up, but it may just be that 5 people had that mean score. So I'd like for you to keep that in mind. And so as it relates to empathy, oh, if you could go back to the previous slide, thank you. So as it relates to empathy and trust, we can see there's a lot of similarities there, you know, as it relates to gender, as it relates to age, and also education, because again, other can somewhat be related to graduate, but we see that the teaching schedule is a little bit different. Those who teach weekly have a little more empathy than those who do not. And then under trust, those who teach quarterly had a higher mean score. Next slide, please. Thank you. So then as it relates to planning and delivery, we see those who teach quarterly had the highest mean score, same thing with accommodating. And so what you notice here, that's a little bit different between planning and delivery and accommodating is the age group. So those between 45 and 54 had the highest mean score as it relates to planning and delivery of instruction. But then as it relates to accommodating, those between the ages of 25 and 34 were more accommodating towards their learners. And what you will see too with these as well is that those who participated in Christian education generally were the individuals who said yes. So those who did participate in Christian education had the higher mean scores. Next slide, please. Now, things are going to look a little different with insensitivity. So those who indicated that they teach as needed had the highest mean score. But then it was the males who also had the highest mean score when it comes to insensitivity. And then those between the ages of 35 and 44. Now, what I found interesting under learner-centeredness is those with an associate's degree had the highest mean score here. And again, you know, keeping in mind that that sample may not be that high, but still I found that interesting that those with an associate's degree had the highest mean score under learner-centeredness. And then finally, teacher-centered. So we see here those with who teach quarterly had the highest mean score. And then look at age. So this is really different. Those between the ages of 65 and 74. And what could possibly explain this is that those adults between those ages might be teaching the way that they were taught. And we know back in the day, if you will, that a lot of didactic learning was taking place. We were sitting there, we were told what to do, kind of using the banking system. Let's open up their heads and just pour all this knowledge in and then have them to regurgitate it to us. And so it could be that some of these individuals might be doing the same thing. And so that might be one explanation for them having that high mean score. And then you see those with an associate degree, and then females also were teacher-centered. And I found that one pretty interesting too. So I will be analyzing the data more closely to see what might explain that. So next slide, please. So what does that mean as far as instructional perspectives in AME? So for those who participated in this study, interestingly, empathy and trust, there was significance with those two, and all of the other factors, except for insensitivity, there was a negative correlation. So what that means is that the more empathy and trust that the AME instructors had, the more planning they will do, the more accommodating that they will be. They will be less insensitive, and then they'll be more learner-centered and teacher-centered. Now, as it relates to planning and delivery, there was also a positive relationship with all the other factors, except for insensitivity. It did not correlate with that at all. So there's no relationship there. And same thing with accommodating, and then learner-centered and teacher-centered. So overall, as it relates to the AMEs that participated in this study, I would say that it's good to see that they are empathetic, that yes, they do have trust for their learners, and that they're also engaging in planning and delivery of their instruction. So I interpret that to mean they're just not waiting to the last minute to, put something together to go teach a class, really giving that some thought. And then they are being accommodating as well. And again, that's something that we talk about in adult education, understanding that our adult learners are coming into our classroom situations with different issues. And we just need to be mindful of those sorts of things. And then certainly we don't want to be insensitive towards learners. We want to, again, keep in mind things that they might be going on with them. And then learner-centeredness is certainly something that we want to encourage for adult educators, because with that can help enhance the learning situation. It was interesting too with the study that I did looking at barriers to participation. One of the things that participants indicated was that the instructors' instructional techniques that were used, that was certainly a barrier as well. So again, if somebody's just lecturing to adult learners, that's going to really be a turnoff. And then again, teacher-centered, that's something that we really kind of shy away from. And I think as it relates to maybe getting away from that, and this is something I had to do myself when I first started teaching, because I would go into the classroom, I had to follow my syllabus, I had to get through A, B, and C, and that was it. But over time, I just began doing some different things, kind of stepping out of my comfort zone. And so I think as educators, that's something that we have to do. So if you are accustomed to just reading from the book, just lecturing, maybe try something different. Something else that I do too, in the classroom, I encourage my students to find literature for themselves that they can share with the class, because I don't have to always be the expert, or as we like to say, the sage on the stage. I like to be the guide on the side, if you will. And so, again, I think that's something that even instructors within the Black church can consider. Next slide. So as it relates to my next steps, I will continue cleaning the data. And so what I mean by that is that, so each response that somebody gave, I have to go in and clean it. So for example, I gave that example where when I asked someone, how many years have you been a member of your church? They may have mentioned 3 different churches that they were a member of, and then they finally mentioned the church that they're a member of. So I have to go in and clean the data. And so from there, I have to code every response. And then from there, I can do the data analysis. So I'll continue doing that. And then my next steps from there will be continuing to present as I'm doing tonight. I've presented to some of the other denominations. I will also be presenting at different conferences. So, for example, the American Association for Adult and Continuing Education, the Religious Education Association Conference, etc. And then I will also be publishing from the findings as well. And with all the data that I've collected, I certainly will have an opportunity to publish for quite some time. And so thank you for your attendance and for your interest in this study. And again, I want to thank Reverend Pierce for his assistance. And at this time, I will turn it over to Reverend Pierce for our Q&A.
Thank you so much, Dr. Isaac-Savage. You've been doing a lot of work. You had to work really hard with denominational leaders such as myself to get us in and to get us to mobilize our people to respond to the survey. You clearly have spent many hours going over the responses that you received, and now you are sifting through that information and cleaning up that information. So once again, you can tell this part of our story in the Black churches. So we thank you for this work that you've been doing. Certainly for those who are watching this broadcast, if you have questions, we ask that you go ahead and type those questions in the comments section so that we can ask Dr. Isaac-Savage your question. Also, let us know where you are viewing this broadcast from. As Dr. Isaac-Savage alluded to, we know that the AME Church is a global church, and so there are Christian educators in 40 or more countries where there are AME congregations. I know some of them are asleep right now, but they will be watching this with the rebroadcast and on-demand features. But certainly, I think it's fair to say, Dr. Isaac-Savage, that in many ways your initial findings basically hold a mirror up to the Christian educators in the AME Church, and I think in some ways you are giving confirmation to some of the things that we are seeing and experiencing. Certainly, one of the privileges I have as the executive director of the Department of Christian Education is to talk with Christian educators across our denomination, and at times do trainings and hear questions and concerns. And the thing I most love, learning best practices that I can then share more broadly across the denomination. But as your research has bared out, our congregations are indeed graying. Certainly our church schools reflect that as well, and some of our Christian education programming. When we look at your demographics, particularly as we think of the life age and stages, when we think of adult learners, young adults, that's a population that many of us would like to see more of in the church, and that kind of bared out as well. And the fact that the churches were able to pivot during the pandemic. I even wondered when you talked about the demographics of those in the 60s and 70s and above, and the encouraging sign that they were clearly able to use technology enough to complete an online survey. That certainly is positive and encouraging. But I did wonder if your survey had happened before the pandemic, if they would have been able to. And so maybe that is one of the learnings. They learned a certain level of facility with technology, and
Hmm.
that's a positive thing, given that society is moving more and more to technological use. So thank you again for what you have shared with us, and particularly the instrument of instructional perspectives, because I do think um, focusing in on those particular areas uh, strengthen teaching and enrich the learning experience. And it's not simply about information sharing and
Hmm.
information regurgitation, but it
Right.
is about receiving the story or receiving this information in such a way that it connects to our experiences and our stories, and that helps us make sense of our world. It helps us understand more about God and ourselves, and our purpose and the callings that God has placed on us. So effective learning is critical in Christian
Yes,
education. So
indeed.
in as much as you have raised the mirror, you've also, I would say, raised a challenge for us as well, to think about empathy and trust. I have found, probably even more so during the pandemic, that people come to these learning experiences for a number of reasons. Some is to inquire more information, more data. Others um, really do come seeking answers and seeking meaning. And still
Hmm.
others come in search of community. And so when I
Yes.
think of empathy and trust, those are hallmarks of community. And
Yeah.
so while Christian educators must think about the accuracy of information that they are sharing, they also have to think about how do we build a community of learning and a community of teaching where empathy and trust and the other elements in the instrument are emphasized and used. So
Hmm.
I know most of your work uh, has focused on adult education, and I know
Hmm.
that's your comfort zone. But you said that sometimes you've gone outside of your comfort zone. Uh, I know that we will get many questions, because the question I get often is, what are we going to do about the children and the youth? I would say even before the pandemic, many of our, if we just take church school, now we know that Christian education does not just equal church school, but church school is a significant, has been for many decades, a significant part of Christian education,
Hmm.
even though it's not the only exclusive expression of Christian education and faith formation. But having said that, many of our churches do have church schools. And even prior to the pandemic, um, there was a decreasing number of children and youth in those traditional church schools. I think the pandemic um, accelerated that
Mm-hmm.
diminishing. Uh, Many children and youth experienced Zoom fatigue. They had used Zoom for their
Yes.
school Monday through Friday. It worked sometimes, sometimes it didn't work. You talked about access to
Mm-hmm.
internet. We found that that was a challenge for many of our families as well. And so the Zoom or virtual learning for church school and for Christian education for youth and children perhaps did not work as well, and has not worked as well as it has for adult learners. Um, I know that wasn't your focus in the research, but might you have something to say about that? And then, particularly, if not children and youth, what might you want to say about young adults, since those are a part of the adult learner? Uh,
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think even with that population, we still have to think about the instructional techniques that we're using. So if instructors are still lecturing to the youth, again, they have to consider some other techniques to use, because that just is not going to set well with them. And I think it's also important, as we think about like online instruction, making it as interactive as possible. I know, for example, with one of the classes that I teach, I like to do what I call like a relaxation or icebreaker activity. So every week, students have to share an emotion, just kind of to set the stage for the class. And what that does for me, that gives me an idea of the mood of the class, if you will. If everybody says, they're in a good mood, they're happy, whatever, then I know, okay, well, then I can do this tonight. But if a lot of people are not doing too well, then maybe I might need to alter what I was thinking about teaching. And so I think even as we think about young adults, we have to consider that as well. And maybe what we plan to do may not work for that particular class session. So we have to be flexible. And I think that's a really important, to be flexible with our learning. We don't always have to stick with the book. Also, it's helpful too to bring in other resources. I use videos sometimes, as opposed to just sticking to the book, bringing other supplemental instruction. And as I mentioned before, I also invite students, to my learners, to bring in other reading materials that they think others in the class might find helpful as well. So I think, again, using a variety of instructional methods and being flexible is going to be really key, even with that population of learners. And I wanted to piggyback on something else that you talked about. You mentioned the older adults and technology. And as I was looking at the findings of this, I thought about my mother and my dad, for that matter. So interestingly, now both of them have a cell phone. So now my dad, who's in his 80s, now he is quick to send a text message and check his voice messages. Whereas my mother, who's 80 years old, now she will not check her text messages and she will not check voicemail. But if she wants to look up something, so for example, she likes to look at people's net worth. So she will pick up their phone and ask, what is so and so's net worth? And she'll ask other questions too. But now my dad will not do that. So it's interesting how older adults use technology in different ways. But yes, she loves getting that on that phone to ask a question about anything, whereas my dad will not do that. But yes, he will send a text and he will check voice messages. So, so the complete opposite, if you will, of the use of technology, but they are both using technology. So again, yes, older adults are using it, but they're using it in different ways.
Siri, what is the net worth of Dr. Isaac Savage? No, just teasing. But that is funny that that's her practice. She finds out what everybody's worth. But to model something that you have said, certainly to those who are viewing this broadcast, let's hear some of your best practices. What are the resources that
Yeah.
you are using um, to uh, create an engaging learning community where there's trust and empathy? that's where it is learner centered. Let's hear what those resources are that you're using. What are those best practices or techniques? What are those icebreakers or just interesting entry points into a lesson that you might be using? Share, especially if you have particular techniques and methodologies that you're using in online learning. Let us hear from you. Let us know what some of those are. That way we can build our body of knowledge as we all move forward together in this. Um, Often we as AMEs have to remember that this is not a U.S. church only,
Mhm.
and certainly your research was primarily U.S. based, but much of what you have shared today, um, I think, is applicable in our congregations across the
Mhm.
world as well,
Yes.
about creating this learning community and being flexible. And certainly, some of our brothers and sisters know more uh, uh, about being flexible than some of us in the U.S. Um, and I want to thank James Brown from the 7th Episcopal District in South Carolina. He raises the online tool that I know some of us know and have
Wonderful.
used, Cahoots. As a fun way, Kahoot is a fun way to engage the online learning community, especially those of us who have a little competitive nature about us. That's a wonderful tool. So thank you. Thank you, Brother Brown, for that example. We are quickly getting close to the end of this broadcast. Dr. Isaac-Savage, it's hard to believe. This has been so interesting how the time passes so quickly with these broadcasts. Uh, I guess I would ask of you what parting words or words of advice or words of encouragement do you have for those Christian educators who may be watching and listening to this broadcast and who are feeling overwhelmed or maybe even discouraged as they engage in the teaching ministry of the church?
Mhm.
Based on your current research and other research, what words of encouragement might you have for them?
Sure. So one word that I would have is to keep doing what you're doing, and especially as I think about the history of the AME Church. I can remember when I was doing my dissertation research, I was just amazed at the educational background of the AME Church. So I also encourage you to think about that. You know which denomination you are representing, and the high educational standards of the AME Church as well, but also encourage you to think about doing some things differently, trying some new instructional techniques, talking to others to hear what they're doing, because that may be one of the reasons that you might be getting a little burned out, for example, because I know even as an educator myself on the collegiate level, I have to do different things because like, okay, I've been doing this, for a long time. So let me try something different. And, it may be uncomfortable initially, but the more you do it, the more comfortable that you become. And then you also know what works well for you and what doesn't. So, for example, I know using humor does not work well for me. Now, while I like a good laugh, I am not good at using humor in the classroom. So you have to find out what works well for you and what does not. And also encourage you to maybe even take time to find out what your learners want. Do an assessment. A lot of times we don't do that. We just assume that we know what our learners want, but take some time to actually find out what they would like to learn. In this other study that I did, one of the participants indicated that, they're always teaching the same thing and teaching the same way. So think about how you can do things differently, and then think about some different courses that you could also teach as well. Also, I would say consider the topics that you use or the titles that you use for courses, because sometimes the titles can be a little misleading from what's actually taught. So really consider that as well. Does this title really reflect what I am teaching? But again, I just encourage you to keep doing what you're doing. And then sometimes you have to step back and just take a break for a little while, because again, sometimes we do get overwhelmed and we get burned out. But just step back and get energized and talk to others and learn what they're doing. And I think that's something that will help you. Attending the Christian Education Conference that the AME Church offers, or maybe that your church or region offers, I think is always helpful too, because you can learn from others. It's just amazing all the things that people are doing. So take the time to also engage in learning yourself, because we are lifelong learners as well. We are teaching adult learners, but we are also lifelong learners. So I encourage you to continue to engage in adult learning.
Thank you. Thank you so much for those words of encouragement. And I echo them back to you as you continue your research. Keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you.
Keep helping us tell the story. We certainly be praying for you as you continue with this important work on our behalf, really. So thank you so
you.
much, and thank you for taking time to share with us today. And let me thank you for that commercial for the annual meetings of the ministries in Christian education that our department has, as well as the
Yes.
quadrennial Connectional Christian Education Congress. So thank you
Yes.
for that plug, and certainly these are opportunities for us to gather and to learn together
Mhm.
and to learn from each other. And these Christian education department talks, these CED talks, are also another opportunity for us to continue to learn together. On last Saturday, our Fellowship of Church Educators hosted the second installment of the For the Christian Educator panel discussion. Um, the first one was during the Christian Education Congress. The second one was this past Saturday. It is on the FCE Facebook page as well as the department's page, and will be on our YouTube channel, as will this broadcast. So we certainly invite you to invite others to join in and to the presentations as a part of our collective continuing education. Allow me to also share a few other announcements. Now that many of you have responded to Dr. Isaac-Savage's research questionnaire, now that I know that you will respond to an online survey, the department will be conducting an online survey in the next few days, and we're going to ask for your responses and your assistance. As you know, for some decades now, the department has had a Connectional Christian Education certification program. It has been revised in the past, and it's now due for yet another revision. We were already in the process of reviewing the program in COVID, which has caused us even more so to need to review and revise. And so we're going to give you a survey to find out what you want in a continuing certification program. What are the needs at this moment for a certification program? And your responses will help us hopefully build something that is even more relevant and useful as you engage in the teaching ministry of the church. As we think about October, the Association of AME Scouts, that ministry in the Department of Christian Education for Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts, these young people and their adult leaders are joining in the fight against breast cancer with a 5K run. The in-person one is October 8th. The virtual run is the 8th through the 10th of October. You can find more information and register by visiting 5k.amescouts.org, 5k.amescouts.org. Dr. Beelan, our president and publisher of the AME Publishing House, would have me to announce Church School Weekend. So September is Christian Education Month, and in October, we in the AME Church observe Church School Weekend. And this year it is October 15th through 16th. You can find more information and resources by visiting iame.org/AME Church School Day altogether. iame.org/AME Church School Day. Speaking of this fall here in the Northern Hemisphere, the months of September, October, and November. This quarter in our church school curriculum, particularly our connectional church school, which is hosted by our president and publisher, Dr. Beelan, every Sunday morning or every Sunday, depending on where you are in the connection. This quarter, the members of the Richard Allen Young Adult Council are serving as teachers. And certainly in September, we were off to a great start with 4 excellent teachers. And now we move into October with leadership from the Richard Allen Young Adult Council leading us in the Liberating Faith Studies Connectional Church School. You see the Zoom information there. We invite you to join with us. And in just a few more days, Advent will be upon us. And so you'll be getting more information very soon on how to order your 2022 Advent devotionals. And as you know, we produce that jointly with the Christian Education departments of the AME Zion and CME churches. You'll be able to find more information on how to order your devotionals at our department website, ameced.com. Let me again thank Dr. Isaac-Savage and particularly those AMEs who responded to her survey. Thank you so much for the research and for sharing with us. I certainly want to thank our chair of the Commission on Christian Education, Bishop Frank Madison Reed III, and we are certainly praying for Bishop Reed and the members of the 11th Episcopal District, which is Florida and the Bahamas, as well as the 6th Episcopal District, Georgia, the 7th Episcopal, South Carolina, and all those who are currently affected by the hurricane and tropical storm.
Yes.
Ian, know that we are praying with you and for you for your safety as well. We thank Woods Digital Solutions for helping us with graphics for this broadcast, and Ms. Carlene L. Douglas in our department as our office administrator for all of the work she has done behind the scenes. And certainly Sister Freeland, who serves as our faithful producer for our CED Talks. You don't see her, but you see the fruits of her work. So we
Mhm.
thank her. And we thank you, the viewers, who are viewing this now and who will view this in the days to come, for your interest in this work and for the faithfulness that you demonstrate in the teaching ministry of the church. So blessings to you on this last day, these last few hours of the 2022 Christian Education Month. And as we go out, we will end with a PSA video, The Alert, which is the AME Church's voter mobilization initiative. We have a short video from our senior bishop of the African Methodist Episcopal Church, Bishop Adam J. Richardson. So all those who can, who are registered, we encourage you, those in the U.S. and elsewhere, if there are elections in
Mhm.
your area, we encourage you to go out and vote. God bless you and thank you.
I'm A.J. Richardson, Senior Bishop of the African Methodist Episcopal Church. It seems that in every election cycle, someone is sure to say how important the upcoming election is. The narrative goes something like this: this is the most critical election in a generation. Well, this time we really mean it. We can't stress strongly enough just how crucial this election is, up and down the ballot, national, state, and local elections. Voting is not only our civic duty, it is also our duty of faith, with concerns for the environment, affordable health care, education, the economy, for our nation's place in the world, and the myriad other existential public policy issues that affect our lives, the lives of our families, and the next generation. By all means, vote.